Most men operate under a fundamental flaw when trying to hold a woman's interest. They believe that winning and keeping her focus requires relentless effort, constant outreach, and complete accessibility. They flood her phone with endless messages, offer lengthy explanations for every minor detail, and make themselves available at a moment's notice. The core logic driving this behavior is simple. If I show up constantly, I will prove my value and become indispensable. Yet, human psychology operates in the exact opposite direction. The moment you become a permanent fixture who is always waiting on standby, your presence stops being a prize and simply becomes background noise. Value is entirely driven by scarcity and intent. When something is unlimited, accessible without effort, and present in overflowing quantities, human nature naturally downgrades its worth. Think about how people interact with resources that are guaranteed versus those that are rare. When a person knows they can reach you at any second of any day, your attention shifts from being something special to something expected. Whatever is expected rapidly loses its emotional charge. You become predictable, and predictability is the quickest path to fading into the background of someone's mind. People rarely obsess over what is guaranteed, but their curiosity is instantly triggered by what disappears. When a man drops everything the second his phone buzzes, instantly replying to every message and growing anxious during brief moments of silence, he communicates a subtle but damaging message. He is telling the other person that his time has no inherent value, that he has no competing priorities, and that his life revolves entirely around their reaction. That kind of instant reactivity doesn't project warmth or devotion. It projects a lack of personal direction and high emotional dependency. A man driven by purpose moves through the world entirely differently. He doesn't ignore people as a cheap game or a tactical manipulation trick, but rather because his time and energy are genuinely anchored in his goals, his growth, and his responsibilities. When he gives you his attention, it feels focused, deliberate, and earned, because it isn't handed out freely to fill an internal void. His silence isn't a form of passive aggression. It is simply the natural result of a life actively being lived. That single distinction shifts the entire dynamic of an interaction. Intentional attention carries weight because it is backed by self-respect and boundaries, whereas constant availability feels cheap because it is rooted in a need for reassurance. The moment you stop making yourself instantly accessible on demand, you force a shift in perception. Absence creates the mental space necessary for someone to evaluate your worth, spark curiosity, and realize that your presence is a privilege, not an entitlement. Attraction drops the exact second you start chasing validation, but it explodes the moment you master emotional self-control. Most men fundamentally misinterpret why they lose respect in relationships. They think they lost power because they cared, so they try to swing to the opposite extreme by acting cold, detached, or distant. But caring isn't the problem. You don't lose respect because you care deeply. You lose respect because you make caring your entire identity. The moment your personal goals, daily routine, and emotional stability vanish the second a woman enters the picture, you forfeit your personal power. You stop building your own future, abandon your ambitions, and make your entire sense of self-worth depend on whether someone texts you back within 5 minutes. That kind of instant emotional reactivity exposes deep-seated insecurity. When a small delay in communication causes you to spiral into frustration, double text, or demand explanations, you reveal that your emotional state is completely fragile and easily manipulated by external events. You signal that you have no real foundation holding you up from within. When a man relies on external responses to feel grounded, he ceases to be a strong, stabilizing presence. Instead, he becomes a burden, someone who requires constant reassurance just to maintain his composure. Real power has nothing to do with playing childish psychological games, withholding affection, or faking detachment just to get a reaction. Those tactics are transparent and rooted in the very insecurity you are trying to hide. True power comes from becoming so genuinely locked into your own purpose and growth that your time and energy simply are not available on demand. It is the natural result of having a life rich with ambition, discipline, and direction. When your priorities are clear, you don't need to perform for attention, nor do you feel the urge to over-explain yourself or force constant communication. Your life has momentum independent of anyone else's input. When your silence stems from authentic self-respect rather than bitter manipulation, it triggers a fundamental psychological shift in how others perceive you. Humans are naturally wired to pay attention to changes in pattern and shifts in focus. The moment a man who was once overeager and hyperreactive suddenly shifts his focus back onto his own life, the entire room feels it. It creates an immediate gap that logic tries to fill, prompting natural questions. What changed? Why is his focus elsewhere? What is he building? Curiosity captures a person's mind far more deeply and permanently than constant pleading, over-explaining, or desperate pursuit ever could. By mastering your own emotions and placing your personal mission first, you reclaim control over your time, elevate your value, and command genuine respect without ever having to ask for it. Endless predictability is the silent killer of dynamic tension. Human beings are rarely captivated by what they fully understand and can completely anticipate. They obsess over what feels slightly uncertain, intriguing, and unresolved. When you lay every thought bare, over-explain your day, reveal every fleeting emotion, and constantly seek validation, you strip away every layer of intrigue. You hand over the full manual to your personality on day one. There are no remaining puzzle pieces, no unspoken thoughts, and no depth left to explore. By eliminating all the space between you and another person, you remove all dynamic tension, and without tension, genuine curiosity completely dies. A calm, self-controlled man never has to fake mystery or play contrived mind games to create an aura of intrigue. True mystery isn't a performance. It is simply the natural byproduct of a man living a grounded, purposeful life. Because his focus is directed toward his own goals, he naturally leaves empty space in the conversation. Human nature inherently despises a vacuum, and when space is left open, the mind automatically tries to fill that void with questions. What is he working on? What is he thinking right now? Why isn't he seeking my validation? Silence creates the mental landscape required for someone to actually think about you, wonder about your world, and desire to know more. You do not need to rush to fill every single pause in a conversation, nor do you need to launch into a defensive explanation every time a misunderstanding occurs. The urge to constantly explain yourself comes from a deep-seated fear of being misjudged or losing another person's approval. When you resist that anxious urge and comfortably settle into the quiet moments, your posture changes entirely. Silence communicates patience, emotional self-sufficiency, and an unshakable inner confidence that doesn't panic when immediate validation is missing. By choosing composure over constant chatter, you demonstrate that your peace of mind isn't dependent on keeping up a constant stream of reassurance. You signal that you are entirely comfortable in your own skin, fully in control of your reactions, and far too focused on your internal standards to be rattled by temporary awkwardness. That level of steady self-possession commands quiet respect and naturally draws people in, proving that what remains unsaid often holds infinitely more power than 1,000 spoken words. Anyone can react, snap, launch into a defense, or send a desperate double text in the heat of the moment. Giving in to an immediate emotional surge requires zero strength, zero skill, and zero self-regulation. It is an automatic, primitive reflex. It takes real, deliberate discipline to stay still and composed when your emotions are screaming at you to react. Modern society constantly preaches the idea that every internal feeling must be expressed instantly and fully. But when you turn every minor emotion into an immediate outburst, constant venting and over-explaining stop looking like openness. They start signaling emotional volatility, weakness, and extreme dependency on outside validation. Emotional control is completely misunderstood by most men. It is not about manipulating, coercing, or controlling the actions of other people. It is about preventing other people's actions from controlling you. When you allow a delayed reply, an offhand comment, or an unexpected change in behavior to throw off your mood, you are handing over the steering wheel of your life. You give away your power, letting external events dictate whether you feel confident or panicked. The second you refuse to react impulsively to every minor trigger, the entire dynamic of an interaction shifts in your favor. You immediately stop appearing needy and erratic, stepping instead into the stance of a grounded, unshakable man. Human nature is drawn toward stability, particularly in a world full of noise and constant drama. People naturally look to, trust, and respect individuals who maintain their composure under pressure, men who stand like an anchor while the storm rolls past. When you prove that your inner peace is not easily shaken by small inconveniences or sudden emotional shifts, you project immense value and self-ownership. Silence in those moments becomes a fortress. It demonstrates that you operate from a position of inner strength, showing that your emotional state belongs exclusively to you and cannot be easily manipulated by anyone else. Certainty creates comfort, but unbroken comfort inevitably leads to taking things for granted. When a resource, a feature, or a human presence is constantly available without limit, human perception adapts to it until it becomes completely invisible. When you are always there, answering every call on the first ring, dropping your own plans at a moment's notice, and hovering around another person's digital perimeter, your value fades through pure familiarity. You become part of the background scenery. Absence is the critical psychological force that provides contrast. It breaks the routine and creates the necessary distance for someone to actually reflect on your worth and feel the weight of your presence. This dynamic has nothing to do with playing toxic mind games, faking indifference, or calculated manipulation. It is entirely about basic human perspective. A man whose entire daily existence revolves around a single individual unintentionally communicates a fatal vulnerability, that his entire inner world is fragile, empty, and dependent on external approval. Conversely, a man who genuinely values a connection but remains uncompromisingly committed to his own mission, goals, and personal boundaries projects undeniable strength. He demonstrates that while he welcomes companionship, his life is already moving forward with purpose. True importance is derived from the quality of your presence, never from the sheer quantity of your time. Flooding someone's life with endless availability cheapens every interaction, turning what should be a meaningful connection into a routine expectation. When your time is genuinely constrained by your pursuit of self-improvement, career, fitness, and passion, the moments you do share carry far more weight and dynamic energy. Stop trying to plead for attention or force respect through constant pursuit. Instead, focus entirely on building a life so grounded, purposeful, and meaningful that your time naturally becomes a limited and valuable commodity. The real purpose of mastering silence is never about playing mind games or trying to force someone else to think about you. The true purpose of silence is to break your reliance on the belief that your worth depends on another person's attention. The exact moment your confidence relies on external approval, you hand over complete ownership of your personal power. You begin bending your opinions to match theirs, erasing your personal boundaries to avoid conflict, and constantly operating from a place of quiet desperation, asking yourself, what do I need to say or do just to make them stay? That desperate mindset quietly destroys your self-respect from the inside out. Real self-respect isn't a performance put on for an audience. It means maintaining high personal standards, strong principles, and firm boundaries even when no one is watching or applauding you. Your inherent value as a man does not magically spike simply because someone chooses to give you attention, nor does it drop or disappear because someone decides to walk away. Your worth exists completely independent of another person's reaction, approval, or presence in your life. When you finally shift your core foundation from seeking insecurity-driven validation to standing on solid self-respect, your outward behavior transforms naturally. You completely stop over-explaining your choices, seeking reassurance for every decision, and forcing forced, uncomfortable interactions. You stop treating attention like a prize you have to beg for, and start treating your energy as a valuable resource. You no longer need to convince anyone of your worth. You simply step into it, live by your own standards, and let your grounded actions speak for themselves. If another person's subtle shift in mood has the power to ruin your entire morning, they own you. If the time it takes for someone to reply to a text dictates whether you feel confident or completely worthless, they control you. True power has never been about forcing someone else to bend to your will, convincing people to chase you, or playing psychological mind games to gain upper hand leverage. Real power, the only power that actually matters, has always been about absolute self-mastery. You cannot force another human being to feel a certain way, prioritize you, or treat you with the exact devotion you desire. Trying to control external outcomes, manipulate someone's feelings, or manage how other people perceive you is an impossible battle that only breeds frustration, anxiety, and resentment. True freedom begins the moment you give up the exhausting attempt to control external circumstances and turn your focus inward to master your internal response. When you stop chasing outcomes you can't control and start governing your own thoughts, actions, and reactions, the entire world shifts around you. When your peace of mind, self-worth, and daily identity are no longer held hostage by someone else's behavior, you become completely immune to manipulation. You stop overreacting to silence, you stop panicking when plans change, and you stop begging for validation from sources outside yourself. That unshakable inner stability is the ultimate strength behind silence. It isn't a passive weapon used to get a reaction out of others. It is a live reflection of a man who owns his mind, respects his time, and lives with complete emotional self-mastery.